Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the LSU Insider podcast. I'm not Perrin Keys. I'm Zach Ewing, taking over for Perrin Keys. Some big shoes to fill. Not literally, but some big shoes to fill. I'm here with Darcey, Koki Riley today. Got a fun podcast for you that I get to guest host. We're going to talk hypotheticals today, and our big one is if LSU could add a sport. We're not worried about budget. We're not worried about Title IX. We're not worried about any of that stuff. We're just going to give them the magic ability to add a sport. What would it be? We'll talk to these guys about that. We'll also get the LSU news of the week and much more here on the LSU Sports Insider podcast right after this.
Hockey fans, it's time to hit the ice with Caesars Sportsbook. Build parlays and same-game parlays, then combine them into super parlays for even greater payouts. Or with quick picks, a variety of ready-to-bet parlays are just a tap away. So don't just watch hockey. Download the Caesars Sportsbook app and experience it like never before. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Okay, so our thanks to our sponsors at Caesars Sportsbook. Guys, fun show today. Happy to be here with y'all. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, subscribe to the channel. Like the video, share the video. We're also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere else. What is it the parent says? Everywhere else that fine podcasts are sold?
Wherever finer podcasts are found.
Finer
I think
podcasts.
is his line.
This is it's. I feel like I feel like I'm on Anchorman. only fine things.
Well, Zach, welcome in. We're so happy to have you here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
I am the Saints editor at The Advocate, Times-Picayune, but I've also been in many different roles over my 7 years here, some very LSU adjacent, so I'm not a fish out of water here. We are going to talk quite a few LSU things. Just want to remind you guys, this is the place to get your LSU coverage. I mean, these guys know their beats inside and out. We've got the best analysis, the best breaking news, the best just regular everyday feature stories that you're going to find on the beat. So, subscribe to The Advocate, check us out. theadvocate.com/LSU and check it out. So LSU Sports Insider, I want to start with some news of the day, guys. The first headline of the week that we should get to, it's a slow time, but LSU always seems to make news in some form or fashion. Les Miles, blast from the past. Les Miles is suing LSU over some wins that the school vacated as part of a self-punishment. This was kind of back a few years ago. It was tied in with the Will Wade deal. LSU was clearly trying to avoid any stiffer punishment from the NCAA. So they took some wins off of Les Miles' record. But what that did was it brought Les Miles under the threshold that he would need to make the College Football Hall of Fame. By winning percentage, he is now no longer eligible to make the College Football Hall of Fame. So I can see it from his perspective, but Reed, this is just, Les was always kind of crazy, and this is just the next chapter in that story.
Yeah, it sort of fits in with I guess his overall ethos. I guess he always was due for a crazy quote, something off the wall, something unexpected, something that's who he was. So I think I don't know what I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what his chances of succeeding with this are, and I don't want to speculate as to what his goals or ambitions are with this. But it's a classic LSU story, I think. And Koki, you've written about it a little bit, so I think it's just sort of it's interesting.
Personally, I had no idea that you could sue based for not getting the wins that you.
This is America.
Earned.
You can sue for anything.
Apparently, yeah. But I think more specifically, what he's specifically suing is the due process that led to the vacated wins in the first place. I think that's how he can get away with it legally, which is again. So he's not necessarily suing because they vacated wins. He's suing because they didn't give him the due process to later vacate the wins or not vacate the wins, right?
To appeal the process or whatever.
Yes, to appeal the process of it.
Right.
I hope that maybe clears up some of this a little bit, but I think at the end of the day, this is I think quite plainly this really shows a person's ego. Right, to really think that they can sue the school that they worked for the wins that they earned, when in reality they weren't playing every position; they were just coaching the team.
I'll tell you what: if it works and he gets into the College Football Hall of Fame, it's going to be an awkward induction night. I'm kind of looking forward to that because, as you said, the Les Miles ethos is just bizarre. The grass chewing and the weird clapping and then a lot of winning at LSU too, right? So it's just, if you're an LSU executive, I don't know if this comes across Scott Woodward's desk, probably someone higher up in the university, where you just have to kind of like face palm, right? Like, what now? Why do we have to deal with this? And I'm not a lawyer either, but my inclination, my radar from having been through stories like this is that this is ultimately going to end in a settlement, and Les Miles is going to get a little bit of money, and LSU is going to tell him to go away.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one of the possibilities. It's sort of like, will it end up, resulting in him being in the Hall of Fame? I don't know. I think I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think in order to get in the Hall of Fame first, a school has to nominate you, right? Like a school has to say, hey, we're nominating you for the Hall of Fame, and a coach or something. So for Les, where would that come from? Would it come from LSU?
From the school you just sued?
Yeah, I don't know. Would it come from Kansas? Definitely not Kansas. Would it come from Oklahoma State? I don't know. I don't know what the whole what the ramifications of it is, what this will lead to, if anything. I think based on sort of how he and his legal team kind of handled it, he might have just said, hey, I'm gonna make a splash here and I'm gonna get everyone talking about it for a second.
That was exactly my impression when I first got the news. Actually, you see the news post on Twitter and whatnot, but like I didn't have to. I'll be transparent. I didn't have to investigate in order to get the lawsuit at all. Like it came to me without even trying, and so they definitely wanted this, splashed across all the headlines at the Advocate and other places. So, and if I'm remembering correctly, with the lawsuit, I don't think there was ever even a mention of money or a settlement for money, because this doesn't. Again, he wants the wins, and I think it's as simple as that. So
I don't know that I've ever heard of vacated wins being returned to somebody. I guess it could be done theoretically. Just kind of a strange. Also, in my final thought on this, I don't know if you guys have more, but if you have to ask to get into a Hall of Fame, that's not something you like invite yourself to.
Right.
It just seems like a faux pas to me.
And the whole issue at hand is the reason why the wins were vacated was because a player was ineligible, because that player was deemed to have received benefits, in the form of payments to his father, payments that were embezzled from Our Lady of the Lake hospital, and payments that were sort of taken from the hospital and given to him. So that's another added layer of griminess.
At the end of the day, like, he's the head coach, he's responsible to oversee that sort of stuff. And at least according to the NCAA, and really all the evidence that is mounted in that sort of case, he didn't do his job in that scenario. So it's just hard to really make an argument that they shouldn't vacate the wins. Granted, I think vacating wins is kind of dumb as like a general principle, because like we watch the games, it's in the history books. Like you can't just say, oh, these wins are wiped off the board. And I say that more generally speaking, but at the same time, to then sue for the vacated wins to no longer be vacated, it's just a lot. And when it comes to this situation, I also think a lot about the Reggie Bush situation, right? If we're talking about sort of vacated wins and vacated trophies and all that sort of stuff, or the Michigan situation, or there's a bunch of examples of this, but there's never really been an example of then the party suing in order to get those wins back, or those trophies back, or those accolades back.
It is just such a typical zany college football story.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
for sure.
It's just perfect, and so it gives us something to talk about in the summertime. You can read more about it on theadvocate.com, as Koki has written, and we'll continue to follow the story no matter where it leads. Moving on, also making headlines in the summer, making headlines wherever she goes, is Angel Reese, the former LSU star basketball player, now in the WNBA with the Chicago Sky, is already sort of stepping into the spotlight, along with Caitlin Clark, of course, who I think is who everybody is paying attention to in the WNBA world. But I guess every hero needs a foil, and like Angel Reese has been chosen for that villain role. I don't know that she necessarily wants the villain role, having heard some of the things she said after she left LSU, but it just seems to find her.
Yeah, and I think she said that she's sort of okay playing that role. You know, she sort of didn't. I don't think she went about trying to sort of fill that archetype, but she is okay with it. And the one thing we've learned from Angel Reese about these last 2-3 years that we've known her and that we followed her is that she's going to be herself and that she's committed to being herself, no matter what people might say about her, no matter what criticism she might get from that. And I think this summer, the main thing that she's sort of gotten criticism for, I guess this summer, has been what she said about Caitlin Clark and how, it's the gist of what she was saying was that, anyone who tries to make the argument that the reason the WNBA and women's basketball as a whole is so popular right now is because Caitlin Clark is the sole reason for that. Angel was pushing back on that. She was saying, it's not just Caitlin, it's me, and it's everyone else, the whole rookie class and some of the other stars in the WNBA. I think, the clip of what she said sort of got taken out of context, saying that, it's more than Angel. It's more than Caitlin. It's me as well. She did also point out how it's the rest of the rookie class and WNBA stars that are driving the narrative. So I think a lot of the criticism she took was because that clip was taken a little bit out of context. So some of the criticism she's taken, in my opinion, has been a little bit unfair. So I think, but overall, we've seen, up close and personal just how popular and just how famous Angel Reese is, right? So I think trying to boil it down that the WNBA is only Caitlin Clark and that she's the only reason why women's basketball is so popular right now, I totally disagree with that at all, because I know how Angel, pushes the narrative. I know how influential she is. And I think, I think she's just going to keep being herself, no matter what that may come with it,
Same goes with Cameron Brink. And Same even goes with Kate Martin, who was obviously Caitlin Clark's teammate at Iowa. And I think a lot of this has kind of exposed how unprepared we are for the popularity of the WNBA and just some of the conversations and some of the controversies that have happened. And we've talked a little bit about how Angel Reese has been swept up in all this. But I think there's like a bigger conversation to be had as to how much further we have to go in order to fully to put everything into context as to what these women are doing and all the extraordinary accomplishments that they're having. But at the same time, we keep on tripping ourselves up on these things that are maybe important, but we're also kind of losing the point of how cool this is and what is actually happening right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we can talk about Caitlin Clark, and she may be the number one reason why the league's getting more attention. But even when Michael Jordan was dominating the NBA, he had rivals and foils and partners. And, Scottie Pippen was a character. And then later in his career, Dennis Rodman was. And as far as rivals, it was Isaiah Thomas and Magic Johnson and Clyde Drexler. And then later it was John Stockton and Karl Malone, Hakeem Olajuwon, like the New York Knicks had a huge part to play. Reggie Miller had a huge part to play. I read a very wise thing, and this is actually going back probably 5 years, about the WNBA and why it wasn't more popular at that time. And I think people say, oh, the quality of play is not as high as the NBA. Well, if that's the reason it's not popular, then why is college basketball popular? Then why is high school basketball popular?
Yeah.
Because the quality of that is it's clearly not a quality issue, because in some cases those sports are more popular than the NBA is. And the conclusion of this column I read was that we need context. We need historical stories to compare athletes to, compare eras to. And the WNBA is finding that here with this rookie class. Not that it didn't have it before, but now that it's in the mainstream, and Angel Reese is a huge part of that, where it's like the old saying in showbiz or in media, like any attention is good attention. And for the WNBA, Angel Reese is bringing attention. Do I think she could handle some of the media stuff better? Yes, I do. And I'm speaking as a journalist, obviously. I think she could do herself a few more favors as far as that goes. But as far as we're talking about these fouls and flagrant fouls and was it too hard? That's part of the growth of the sport, and people realizing that, this is a physical sport too, and it's a good product, and that sort of stuff is going to happen. And if Angel Reese is the one to bring that into the public consciousness, then good for her.
Yeah, Angel's always. I don't know exactly what it's sort of been like to cover her for the Sky. I haven't been up there, in Chicago covering her day to day. But when she was here, she always made herself available to us. She always gave us time. She always gave us good, thoughtful answers, and it was really, always we always sort of got what we needed from Angel, and so she was great to us in the media. She's don't really have any complaints what that is, but I think she and Caitlin Clark and all these other players, they're really good at marketing themselves, right? And I think one of the reasons why the league has taken off so much in the last couple of years is because the players have really taken control of marketing, and they've really sort of gotten the ability to brand themselves and market themselves and find this new audience of people who were just waiting to support the league and waiting to watch women's basketball. And a lot of that came from NIL, when athletes started becoming incentivized to market themselves and to grow their brands. And a lot of people found that, hey, if you invest in women's sports, if you put resources and attention and time into it, then it can grow and it can become this thing that a lot of people cling to and a lot of people focus on. And Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Cameron Brink, Rakia Jackson, Camila Cardoso, along with Asia Wilson, Sabrina Ionescu, and Brianna Stewart, they're all at the forefront of that, and they're really driving all that change. And I think it's a great thing. I think it's great that we're talking about the WNBA and that we're talking about women's basketball and that we're opening up more opportunities, not only for the players that are in the league right now, but for the younger ones as well who are going to be on the scene in a few years.
Yeah, 100%. You're watching the LSU Sports Insider podcast. I want you right now to click the like button below the video. Just do it. Just do it. It takes 2 seconds. Just do it right now. And while you're at it, if you're not subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel and help us grow as we continue to do these things through the summer. We are sort of angling towards our topic of the day, which is which sport should LSU add if they were going to add a sport? I want to see your suggestions for that too. So put it in the comments below and let us know what you think. A scholarship sport, don't have to worry about budget, don't have to worry about Title IX, anything of that. We're adding a scholarship sport to LSU with magic dust, and we want to know what you would add. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, Reed, you cover women's basketball. We talked about that. We're going to switch to Koki's beat, which is LSU baseball. And Jay Johnson continues to just reload this roster. Some big news this week as they get a transfer from Dayton. They also, probably their top high school recruit has opted out of the MLB draft. Tell us exactly how this roster is shaping up as the College World Series wraps up in Omaha.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because they've been very aggressive in the transfer portal so far. They've added 7 guys, but when you still look at this roster, there's still some holes to fill, particularly with left-handed pitching, particularly with at catcher, because with Brady Neal entering the transfer portal, and then third base is still, I'd say, more or less of a hole for them. They have a couple freshman options, but you don't know if all of them are going to come, and they're still freshmen, so It's really interesting because they've really loaded up on kind of these first base types. Luis Hernandez, who they added about a week ago from Indiana State, he's more of a first base type, even though he has some experience at catcher. Eddie Yamin, who's the latest addition, the Dayton transfer, he played pretty much exclusively at first base this past season, but he's also played a tiny bit of catcher and some corner outfield as well. So they have a lot of versatile pieces, but they're mainly first basemen. So I feel like that's kind of interesting given the state of where Jared Jones is, because he is draft eligible despite being a sophomore. I've said this a few times, but he was born on August 1st. The cutoff date is August 1st to be in the MLB draft. So This is just a really unfortunate situation if you're an LSU
If he was
fan.
born on August 2nd, he'd be coming back to LSU next year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yep.
If he turned 21 on August 2nd.
Amazing.
Yep.
And he still might come back to LSU. He
There's still a
hasn't.
chance. Yeah. There's absolutely still a chance. But he was mashing some balls at the MLB draft combine this week. And hitting the ball harder and further than most of the other guys there with wood bats. But you were going to say something, Zach?
You talk about all these first base types, and LSU under Jay Johnson has at times had issues with its defense. To me, I'm a traditional baseball team should be built up the middle. Is that a concern for this team going forward?
I'm not 100% sure if it definitely is a concern. I think they have a decent amount of freshmen who can at least play in the middle infield, and Stephen Milam's coming back at second base. Part of it's just a roster construction thing. Mike, I feel like they must be comfortable that with the fact that Michael Braswell could very well be coming back. He hasn't entered the transfer portal, obviously, and he is draft eligible. But I from my sense, just after watching him play throughout the entire season, I think he'll probably come back to next year's team. So when you have those two guys up the middle already, and in center field, you mentioned Derek Curiel, who was one of their top freshmen who committed to coming back to this team. He can play center field. You have Jake Brown, who played some center field this past season, and then they added Chris Stanfield out of the transfer portal. He played pretty much exclusively in center field for Auburn this past year. So you have three different options and three solid options in center field, despite the fact that you're losing Paxton Kling. And you probably have your starting second baseman and your starting shortstop coming back next season. So really the only up-the-middle position that you really need right now is catcher. And right now it's Blaze Prester, who's a JUCO commit, and that's really it at the moment. And then they could potentially bring in Kate Arambide, who apparently is the top high school catcher in the draft this year, and he's committed to LSU. But again, you don't know if you're going to get him. I think if you had to put a gun to my head, they're going to get him because he's really raw. But we're not really sure. So if you're talking about up the middle positions, I think catcher is really the only big need they have right now.
I think baseball coaches may be more adaptable to this new way of roster building in college sports, where you have to worry about NIL offers and transfer portal every single year, because they do it with the MLB draft where they don't know who they're getting in. You have to be able to pivot and keep your head on a swivel and all those things to find talent and fill out your team. So Jay Johnson obviously knows what he's doing. He seems adept at it. And Reed, he's just one of these coaches LSU has where the expectations are high. They know the expectations are high. They may have higher expectations for their own programs than even the fans do, if that's possible.
Yeah, winning a national championship in the second year will do that. I think it sort of speaks volumes how they turned it around this season, where they were in, February and March, and how they sort of got to the doorstep of a super regional with a chance to host and then, win a couple games and you're in Omaha again. So I think, Jay Johnson and his staff, they do a good job of developing talent and getting the most out of the roster when it counts the most later in the season. And you got to know that he's grinding the transfer portal and trying to find the right pieces to fit. The transfer portal, it's sort of a double-edged sword because you're losing talent, but you also have a quick fix to replace the talent that you did lose. The one thing I want to ask you about, Koki, and I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot here, but pitching-wise, where they stand pitching-wise, what sort of could the rotation look like next year? I know Griffin Herring kind of has a decision to make. So what exactly does the rotation and then the bullpen options behind them kind of look like as things stand right now, which obviously it's all in flux. But.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And you have Griffin's situation. Obviously, he's draft eligible, and he would be a huge addition to the team, not just as maybe their best pitcher heading into the year, but also a left-handed option, because right now they really only have two left-handers who are almost certainly coming back, and that's Kate Anderson and DJ Primo. Everyone else is either draft eligible or in the transfer portal or just not eligible to come back. So they're in a bit of a tight spot with the left-handed pitching side, but they've added a ton of talented right-handers. One of the more interesting guys, at least I think, is Devin Sharon, who he had a 4.70 ERA at Mount St. Mary's this past season, which doesn't really sound like someone who is going to be top of mind in terms of additions so far this offseason, but he's also 6'5" and throws up to 98 miles an hour. And he also had over 100 strikeouts in 70 innings. So you're talking about a guy who definitely has some talent. And I think that's like a very smart dice roll if you're Jay Johnson. Just bet on the traits, and what they're doing there is they're betting on the traits, and they're getting another guy who can throw really hard and is a really good slider, and that's the sort of addition that's the sort of guy you can keep an eye out for. If he makes the rotation, I wouldn't be shocked, for example, especially if Griffin Herring doesn't come back. But if Herring comes back, it's almost it's you're close to being set because you have him, you have Zach Cowan, who you added from Wofford, who
Right.
I think a lot of LSU fans are familiar with because when people were scouting Wofford, they saw that he was obviously their best pitcher, and now he's on LSU. So you have him through 110 innings this past year. Griffin Herring, who I mentioned, and then Chase Shores, who's coming back from injury, throw to 100 through 18 innings as a freshman. Then he got Tommy John surgery. He's been out for the last year and a half. So that's sort of what the rotation is looking like if they get Griffin back. But if Griffin doesn't come back, then you're looking at Sheeran. You're looking at a few other potential options, Jay Newt. So that's sort of the state of the pitching staff at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important to realize it's still so early.
Yes.
We still have the draft to get through. A lot of transfer portal stuff. Tennessee and Texas A&M are playing in the championship series this weekend, so this season's not even over yet. So a lot can still change, but again, a talented team looks like it's being formed there at the box. All right, you're watching the LSU Sports Insider podcast. I'm Zach Ewing with Reese, Darcey, and Koki Riley, talking through some news of the week. We had more news than I thought we did, actually, but we want to get into the main topic of this podcast, and that's we're going to have some fun now. If you had magic beans and could add a sport at LSU, don't have to worry about Title IX, don't have to worry about budget, don't have to worry about facilities. Let's just say you have all of that stuff taken care of. What sport are you adding? Now, for some context, guys, LSU currently has 21 sports. That's if you count indoor track and outdoor track and men's cross country, women's cross country, swimming, tennis, all that stuff, counting men's and women's separately. 21 varsity sports.
Programs.
Yeah. They also have non-varsity sports, which we can get into too, which maybe gives you an idea of what they should add, what's popular and things like that. But when you start this conversation, I think a lot of people think the sports that got cut because of Title IX. That's immediately where my mind goes. And most places around the country, that's men's soccer and wrestling. LSU never had a men's soccer program. They did have a wrestling program, I think from 1968 to 1985. Is that where y'all's mind goes, or do you have another sport in mind that you'd like to see LSU add, if they could?
I guess I'll start. For me, it's hockey. Because not just because I'm from the Northeast and I have kind of an affinity for hockey, I'm not like the biggest hockey fan ever, but I think watching it in person is one of the most thrilling things you can do one of the most thrilling sports you can watch in person, period. And I also have seen this in practice a little bit because I went to Arizona State and when I went there and covered the team a little bit, they had just started up their hockey program, and you could see sort of the excitement around it. You can see how quickly you can become a contender in it. I think they made the NCAA tournament, I want to say my sophomore or junior year, and they already have a couple players who have made who are at least been drafted in the NHL. And Joey Decord is a goalie in the NHL, and again, the program is less than a decade old. So I think it would be very cool to see that happen because the Baton Rouge Zydeco right now, it's great, gained more popularity than you would have thought for a Louisiana hockey team. So
New Orleans getting mentioned in NHL expansion discussion. I don't know how serious that is, but it's at least being mentioned. Read hockey, yay or nay?
Yeah, I think I'll say yay. Zydeco did pretty well.
Yeah,
they did probably about as well as they could have playing in the River Center. It seems like their first season or so did really well. It seems like they've found an audience. People really clung to it. Baton Rouge, it's a good. People love sports. I think they'll go crazy for any LSU sport. I think when you think about hockey, the new arena plans come into play here. Like we know LSU is starting to think about replacing the PMAC and starting to incorporate starting to start plans to build a new arena. Very early stages in that, but it's kind of fun to envision like how would that look like if you sort of converted into a hockey rink, that sometimes to replace the basketball court. I don't know, probably pie in the sky, but it's pretty cool to think
This
about.
is all pie in the sky. That's okay. That's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
It's June 20th, man. We're filling some summer weeks here before SEC Media Days start here in less than a month, actually. So, hockey, interesting one. I think the point, to your point, whatever LSU adds, they would be good at. I think beach volleyball is the last sport they added. That was in 2014.
Yeah.
And took them, 5 years to be a national championship contender. Like, it did not take long for them to be, there's no beach in Baton Rouge, and they made beach volleyball work, right? So they would make it work, whether it's hockey or anything else. Just from a historical perspective, to kind of add to this discussion, I went back and looked, and I don't know if this is a comprehensive list, but I could find at least 2 sports LSU had that they discontinued. I mentioned wrestling. The other one was boxing. LSU had a boxing team. I got the dates here: 1930 to 1956. I don't think the NCAA even sponsors boxing anymore, probably for obvious reasons. They do sponsor wrestling, and I'm going to throw a vote out for wrestling. I went to Missouri, where wrestling is a big deal. They're top 5 most years. I also wrestled in high school. A good wrestling dual meet is a ton of fun. The SEC used to have it. It doesn't anymore. Missouri's in the Big 12. They're the only SEC school that has wrestling. How about like a combat sport?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great as well. I think, I'm don't really sure how many SEC teams have wrestling programs.
I think it's just the one.
Just Missouri.
Now that Oklahoma is in the conference, it'll be 2.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that I want to throw is men's soccer. I'm kind of a soccer fan. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the Euros right now.
Copa America starts tonight.
Yeah. I think soccer. Soccer can be really fun. And obviously, LSU has a women's soccer program. Why not have a men's program as well?
I think probably wrestling and men's soccer, Koki, are the 2 sports that really got hit hard by Title IX. And we're not going to get into the merits or demerits of Title IX. Like, I think it's brought on a lot of good things, but it undeniably cost those sports a lot of school participation, just because teams had to make the balance equal between men's sports and women's sports. Men's soccer could be very popular at the college level. It is in some places already. In California, it's very popular. Indiana's got a big team. North Carolina. There's schools that do it and do it well. And I really think it could work here. It surprises me in general how little soccer kind of penetrates the consciousness in Louisiana.
That's an interesting point. Because I feel like there's some pretty good youth teams, like high school level teams at soccer around these parts, and not just Louisiana, but like Alabama and Mississippi as well. But it doesn't really hit the mainstream, in terms of like football or even baseball, in terms of just like these sports are top of mind here in Louisiana. Is there a women's sport that comes to mind for you guys that you'd like to see LSU add? I just want to throw that out there.
It's tough just because they've got so many more women's sports than men's sports that it's a little bit harder to come up with one. The one that could be men's or women's would be lacrosse.
Yeah,
I was going to throw out lacrosse.
And then also, as someone who spent a lot of time on the West Coast, water polo is a fantastic spectator sport. Now, again, we're talking pie in the sky. We're not worried about details and things. There's nobody in this part of the country that plays either of those sports, and so you'd have a travel issue. What conference do you join? Are you going to go play all the Northeast teams in lacrosse or all the West Coast teams in water polo? I mean, it doesn't really fit, but I will throw out both of those. I also, and again, just apologize if I'm missing anything. I don't want someone to say, "Oh, you missed the bowling team or whatever." Oh, that's the other one, women's bowling. Yeah. I think Vanderbilt's got a really big bowling program. So Jacksonville State added the sport and won the national title this year in women's bowling.
Wow.
2 years later. I don't. Anyway, I was doing some research on this. There are some non-varsity sports that compete against other schools at LSU. The rugby teams won a national title. I think the men's soccer team did, and they also do have a club hockey team. So they've got some of these sports kind of in place, and there is obviously some interest in them. I don't know. If we take soccer, wrestling, and hockey out, what else would you guys like to see?
I think we should mention the Tiger Girls, the dance team. They won the national championship. They're always competing at the top. They already compete and all, but maybe give them more resources. Invest more in them, give them a bigger stage. I don't know. Maybe.
I agree.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that. And we were talking about this before we started recording, but cricket.
And yeah, John Balance was in here, our photo editor, talking about the cricket club and trying to get that started, and shooting clays was another one. I mean, the possibilities are endless. There's so many sports out there, but we want to know what y'all want. Our choices, I think men's soccer, hockey, and wrestling were probably the 3 at least in this group that we came up with that we like. I know Scott Rabelais said he'd love to see a hockey team. It would be a heck of a lot of fun. LSU in the Frozen Four.
Here's the one thing I want to add before we end this segment. So you've been mentioning that these are pie in the sky concepts, and they are pie in the sky concepts. But I think when Ray Anderson was interviewed about this, and I think someone asked him the question in 2015, 2016-ish, that they asked him the question, what would it take to give Arizona State a hockey team? And he said, I don't know, like $3-4 million. And then a donor came up and said, let's do it. I'll give you $3-4 million. And they turned the club hockey team into an NCAA sanctioned team. And all of a sudden they were off and running. So it's crazy, but all it takes is a couple of motivated people and some money. And then all of a sudden you have a team. So it's just an interesting thing to keep in the back of your head that like this stuff isn't impossible. Like a lot of there was no other Pac-12 school that had a hockey team, and then they just decided to make a hockey team.
I'm glad you said that because I was going to ask could this ever be realistic? Now I'm curious, what did they do? Did they add a women's hockey program too? How did they mesh it with Title IX?
I'm not 100% sure how they meshed it with Title IX. That's a great question because I don't know I couldn't tell you right now off the top of my head. But I will say though that they hired the club coach and they made him the head coach of the NCAA team, and they've been fairly successful considering how young the program is. And I mean, they just recently built they started at a really dinky and fair, to be quite honest, bad hockey arena, and then they just developed a brand new beautiful 5,000 seated hockey arena that the Arizona Coyotes just had to play in for an entire season. So it's become an entire thing because someone asked a question, the athletic director answered it, and then someone who was motivated enough put the resources into actually making it happen. So it's interesting.
I will say, Reed, in this day and age of college athletics, if someone has $3 or $4 million lying around and they want to start a program, the athletic director probably says, "That's great, but look at this NIL fund we have over here." I mean, that's where I think this becomes even more unlikely, because if you're going to spend money, if you're going to get private donor money going to LSU, Scott Woodward is going to funnel that in places that are going to make a difference. Number one in football. Yep. And then in the men's and women's basketball and baseball after that.
Yeah, and I think in the next 5 years or so, I don't think you're going to see, and this is the sad part, of all this change coming to college sports. I don't think you're going to see much expansion, for additional programs and additional scholarships. Schools like LSU will probably be fine, and you probably won't notice much of a difference. But around the country, there's going to be some belt tightening, as things sort of change and as some team programs start revenue sharing, and as part of belt tightening at some maybe group of 5 schools, smaller schools, you might see some athletic programs getting cut, which is kind of a sad reality of the whole landscape.
Not even just a group of 5 schools. I mean, Arizona has a budget crisis at the moment. Yep. Stanford had to join the ACC just to keep all their other prestige non-major sports, because again, they're the best in the country in so many different sports, but they're all quote unquote losing money because of all the emphasis that's on football and the lack of money those other sports are making, despite the fact that they're so good. So sadly, you could see a lot of this happening across the country, and that even that Arizona State story that I had, that was pre-NIL. That was pre-transfer portal. It was just more realistic for that to happen in 2016, 2017 than it was, and than it is today.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, I think as football becomes more expensive between NIL and now there's a coalition to pay players and things like that, if you're not making money, you're kind of in the way of that. And so if a new sport comes on and is not immediately going to be profitable, which is basically impossible in this day and age, it's just hard to see it happening. So that's kind of the serious downer note to this discussion, but it's a lot of fun. We want to know what y'all think. Maybe we'll put a poll up on the YouTube page. We got men's soccer, hockey, could be men's or women's, wrestling, could be men's or women's, and then go down the list: lacrosse, water polo. We mentioned cricket, bowling, all sorts of fun possibilities that are out there. Equestrian, anybody for equestrian? I don't even know how they score that stuff. I couldn't cover an equestrian meet to save my life.
Just go through the Olympics and just try to pick out some.
Yeah,
stuff.
we got to get
That's what I
Rab in
say,
on this discussion. Rab's going to the Olympics. He's got to know about all these.
Yeah, I wish Rab
niche
were here.
sports.
Rab would like this conversation.
Skateboarding, like you can go all the way down the line.
Yeah.
So,
Rugby sevens. Yeah.
Pickleball.
I'd want to say a bunch of winter
tell you
sports,
what, man.
but problem is we're in Louisiana. It's just kind of impossible.
Yeah.
Curling. I love me some curling.
No, curling. is
The Olympic
one
time, I
guess
get
you could
way
do.
into it.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it for our show today. We had some fun with this one. We want y'all to have some fun in the comments. Let us know what you would like to do. Keep the discussion going. Maybe we'll talk more about it when we are back next week. But this has been the LSU Sports Insider podcast for Thursday, June the 20th. He's Koki Riley, Reed Darcey. I'm Zach Ewing. Amelia and Alex are behind the glass for us. Our thanks to them and our thanks to you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like the videos, and follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Until next time, thanks for watching.